Our session is called Access Any Data Anywhere with the Apex Connector Framework. Good old keyboard. You've probably all seen this slide 100 times this week. We have to show it. It's about forward-looking statements. I don't think we're going to make any, but just in case, please make your purchasing decisions based on GA features and not on future items that we might talk about. My name is Ralph Schundemer. I'm a product manager at Salesforce. The product is called Salesforce Connect. I also own a portfolio of other data import and integration tools. And I have with me Shefali Sepra. She's a lead member technical staff and an absolute rock star on my team. And she will do an awesome technical demonstration for you guys. Now, why are we here? Integration is easy, right? Well, at least we will show you some tools that you can use that make your life a little bit easier. We will talk about a product called Salesforce Connect. So I will only spend very few minutes to talk about what is Salesforce Connect, just in case that you have never heard about it. And then we really want to dive deep into how do you build a custom adapter using the Apex Connector framework. And we have chosen Oracle as our external data source target. So Shefali will do a deep dive. What are the things that you need to do on the Oracle side as well as on the Salesforce side to set up a Salesforce Connect connection to an Oracle database? If we have time left, we want to do a quick roadmap outlook, and then we definitely also want to reserve some time for question and answers. I don't integrate much, but when I do, I use Salesforce Connect. It's really a great tool. It's a very, very different approach. Some of you might know it under the name Lightning Connect. So we rebranded about a year ago to Salesforce Connect. And it really is a virtual data integration solution. The key difference is really that data is not copied into Salesforce. We access external data, we bring it in, you can work with it, it looks and feels like a Salesforce object. You can actually also write back to your data source, but the data is never physically stored in Salesforce. There are many, many use cases for that. The premise was also to create a tool that is really declarative. So in general, one of the key cornerstones is to use OData as a protocol. So you can actually set up an integration using OData, which is completely declarative. Now here in this example, there is some coding effort involved because we're actually building a custom adapter. You can also use Salesforce Connect to hook up multiple Salesforce orgs. So let's say you acquire a company, they're also using Salesforce. It's very easy to bring the data in and share it between orgs. With Windows 17, we're very happy to release a new feature. It's reporting on external data. So now you can use the power of reporting in dashboards to run reports on your external data. So let's say you have accounts in Salesforce, you have orders in SAP and invoices in Oracle. You could create a report that combines the three together and run it in Salesforce. Also, a new feature is called wave trending. External objects are also supported in this feature. Think about you set up a report, you schedule it to run on a frequency, and the data is then being copied physically, and that's really the only exception when we physically store data into a wave edge mart so that you can do a trending analysis. Just some more details that explain Salesforce Connect and what it is. You're probably all familiar with standard objects, custom objects. So we created a new object type called external object. It has the look and feel of a Salesforce object, but it's a little bit different. It basically is a representation of the external API structure, let's say of an SAP order, an Oracle invoice, and we really bring that metadata definition into Salesforce and generate this object automatically for you. And that's really the power of Salesforce Connect. It also comes with the full power of the platform. I mean, simple features such as search. You know, it might be a minute thing, but you can search your Oracle database from within Salesforce. I think that's a very powerful use case. It also comes with mobile for free. I mean, if you add an external data source as an external object into Salesforce, you have it on your Salesforce One mobile app without any additional coding. We talked about reports and dashboards. And then, of course, Apex Visualforce, the power of the platform is also at your fingertips. There are 4 key integration patterns that we support with Salesforce Connect. One is using OData. The second one I already mentioned, the Salesforce to Salesforce Connection. We can also use middleware partners that expose data as OData, as an OData endpoints for us to consume. And today we really talk about how can you easily connect with an application that has a rich set of APIs but does not support OData out of the box. And with this, I'm handing it over to Shefali.
Thank you, Ralph. My name is Shefali Sapra, and I'm a lead member of technical staff at Salesforce. And today I'm going to talk about how you can set up your Oracle system for connectivity and also build a custom adapter to talk to the data in your Oracle database. So let's move on. So first of all, your external system needs to be accessible over the internet for you to be able to use that in your custom connector. Now, that could be in the form of a REST API like a no data service or a web service or basically anything that you could make a call out to from your connector. So let's see what we have for Oracle today. So I have an Oracle 11G database running on an Amazon instance. And what I have on top of it is ORDS, or Oracle REST Data Services. And what that essentially is a Java-based service that Oracle provides you that makes it easy for you to define your REST endpoints for your CRUD operations and querying. And what you can do with that is you can define your PL SQL or your SQL query to bind to that actual URI. And we'll take a look at that in a moment. Now, what ORDS also comes with is Auto REST, which, as the name suggests, is a powerful tool to REST enable your entity automatically out of the box. And not only can you can REST enable your data, you can also enable your metadata, so you can consume it from the connector. Now, the other approach that we could have taken is enabled an OData service on top of this Oracle database, in which case we could have used our OData connector that comes out of box with the Salesforce Connect. But since this is a custom adapter demo, we chose to go with ORDS. So let's take a look at what ORDS looks like. Okay. So here is my ORDS. It's running on top of Tomcat. And as you can see, it's on port 8080. And I have opened up this on Amazon, so I can access it over the internet. I'll log into my demo workspace. And what I have in there is the HR database that comes with Oracle. So I'll be using that for my demo today. Okay, once I log in, I go to SQL Workshop and select RESTful Services. And what that gives me is a way to create a new RESTful service. As you can see, I've already created one, so let's see what that is about. Now, I've defined my service. I've given it a name and a URI prefix. And what I can create under that is something called a template and a handler. And template is just a fancy name for a URI. So as you can see, employee, employee/ID, employees, and all these are URIs. And handlers are actually verbs that I could expose on top of these URIs. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So I have my employee ID URI, and the method is get. Now, as you can see that I've selected the source type of a query, which means I'm binding this URI to this source, this query, and all that's doing is fetching the employee record by the ID, and this ID is actually supplied by the URL here. So I can substitute this bind variable with the actual ID, and it'll run this query for me. Similarly, I have REST endpoints for delete, for put, which is updating my record, for post, which is creating a new record for me, an employees get, which will be doing a query, and I have one for search as well. And as you'll see, I'll be using all these endpoints in my Apex connector. So moving on back. And we just saw this as well. So coming to our custom connector, to define your own custom connector, all you need to do is define these two classes, DataSource Provider and DataSource Connection. And what you in the provider, what you do is you describe what your external system can actually do. As in, it could do queries or searches, or it could do writes, and how the pagination would work. And it also creates the connection class for you. And connection is the class where the actual action happens whenever you interact with your Oracle data. So whenever you're importing your metadata, or you're performing any SOSL or SOCL or any of the UI interactions with the data, you call the methods in your connection class. Now, the thing to note about your custom connector is that your standard Apex governor limits will apply. So you can have any number of connectors that you build in your Apex. They'll be only limited by the number of Apex classes that you can create. But you will be only able to use connectors if your Salesforce Connect license allows you to use them. So in theory, I might have like 10 Apex connectors that I've built, but I can use only one because my Salesforce Connect license allows me to create one data source. And we are going to take a look at that in a moment. So here I have a developer org, and I have built my Oracle connector by defining my provider and connection classes. And this is just a helper class that I have to encapsulate all my REST details, my REST callouts. So once we have compiled these, and we go and take a look at the external data sources. Now, I've already defined my Oracle data source provider, so let's take a look at that. So since my connectors are compiled, I'll see them in the type dropdown. As you can see, it shows up here with a prefix of Salesforce Connect Custom. And in addition to that, I had another one, and that shows up here as well. So this... So this is what that is. Moving on. So this is what your provider class would look like. You need to implement 3 methods. The first one is get capabilities. That just tells you what your external system is supporting. So as you can see, here the external system is only supporting reads because we only have query and search. What you can also support is writes. Your CRUD operations, pagination. We are going to take a look at those next. Then you have something called get authentication capabilities. And what this determines is what kind of authentication your external system supports, and essentially what's going to show up in your external data sources setup page UI for you to enter your credentials. And then finally, we have a get connection method, to which we pass in some connection parameters, and it creates a connection class for you. So these are all the capabilities that you can define. So as you can see, query, search are reads, create, update, delete are for writes. Require endpoint just determines if you want to show a URL input type field in your external data source setup page. And require HTTPS means if you want that endpoint to be secure. Query total size means that you are going to be returning the total number of records in your external system, so we can do the pagination for you. And query pagination server driven means you are passing on the burden of pagination to your external system. Now, get authentication capabilities. You can you can provide any of these authentication capabilities, and that will determine what shows up in your authentication protocol drop-down here. And let's take a look at that. So for my external data source, I only have the password authentication. So if I go to the drop-down, it only shows me one. And as you can see, I have an identity type, which could either be per user or named principal. And what that means is if I have a named principal, I can specify my credentials here, and they'll be used for the whole org. Now, if I go ahead and choose per user, that means each user needs to set their own credentials by going to their My Settings page. So let's choose that. So what happens then is, after you are done with providing your credentials, we pass all this information over to you from the information that you've selected in the UI will be passed on to you in the connection parameters. So you will see things like username, password, OAuth token, your protocol, your endpoint, your principal type, and certificate. And now that you have the connection parameters, you can go ahead and start authenticating and make a call out. And we'll see that next. So here is the way you can make an HTTP call out once you have the connection parameters. As you can see, I have a HTTP request that I'm setting an endpoint and the request method. And it's a conditional. So if I have password authentication, I set my username and password. Whereas if I have OAuth, I'll be setting my OAuth token in the header. Now, the thing to note about OAuth is that once your token expires, we don't automatically refresh it for you. So if you get a 401 exception, that means that your token has expired. You can go ahead and throw an OAuth token expired exception. And based on that, we'll attempt to refresh that OAuth token for you, and then also rerun the request that you originally gave out. And the other thing, the other important thing to note in the setup is that all your endpoints should be whitelisted in the remote site settings. So I can show you that right here real quick. So I have my ORDS endpoint listed here, so I can make callouts to it from Salesforce. OK, so that was the provider class. Now let's take a look at connection. So you can actually implement 5 methods. The first is sync, and that gets called whenever you're doing a validate and sync from your external data source setting page. Query is the method that gets called when you are looking at the list view or details or actually running a SOQL query on your external object. Search gets called whenever you're doing a global search or running a SOSL expression. Upsert rows is for inserting or updating records, and delete rows is for deleting a record. And we'll take a look at them in detail. So the first one, sync. So sync actually gets called when you hit the validate and sync button. What that returns to you is a list of data source tables that get converted into an external object. Now, these tables could be generated in your Apex code itself, or you can generate them randomly if your endpoint exposes your metadata as a service as well. So let's take a look at what I have. So I go back to my Oracle external data source. And as you can see, I've already synced one object. So when I click here, now, as you can see, my employees table was already synced, and it shows that to me here as well. And let me sync another one. So now we see that this external data source has 2 tables. And let's drill down into this. Now, these are the standard fields, display URL and external ID, and we can have custom fields as well. So the thing to note here is that the external alias is the actual name of the column on your Oracle table. So you're advised against changing this name because this will break your reference. You can go ahead and change the field label. So okay. So this screen is also showing you the external object and how you can actually create a column inside of your Apex to actually map to these columns on your external object. Okay. So moving on, query is the method that gets called whenever you are in the list view or the detail page or running a SOQL query. And what gets sent into that is a query context, which includes table selection. And what table selection has is the selected table, the columns which correspond to the select clause, filter that corresponds to the where clause, and order that corresponds to the where order by clause. And what it returns you is a table result with a success flag, error message, table name, and rows are actually your actual result that render as a list view or a detail or whatever. And you have your total size and query mode token for pagination. So query filters. So we pass you one filter, but the thing to note about that is that it could be a compound filter, so you would need to break that down into simple types and process it. And the way you can tell apart what filter it is by the filter type on the DataSource.filter object that gets passed in. Let's take a look at what happens when you do a query. So here I have set up my employees object in a tab. So now when I click on it, I see the MRU. This is running off the query method. And if I go and take a look at all the records that I have, this is also powered by query. And when I drill down into a record, again, this calls query. So moving back. Search. So search gets called whenever you're doing a SOSL or you are doing a search in the global search. And you can actually search on multiple tables in a single call. And let's take a look at what search looks like here. So if I search for John, and I know that I have a few Johns in my Oracle database. So as you can see, along with my standard objects, my external object got searched as well. And I have 5 records, and I can view them in Salesforce. Or I can go ahead and view them in my Oracle database. So this goes to my ORDS and runs a call out for me. Going back. So this is what my search method looks like. It takes in a search context, which has a table selection and the search phrase. Now, as you can see, I'm looping through all the tables and performing a search call on all of them. Okay, insert, updates, and deletes. So along with actually defining the capabilities in the DataSource Provider, what we also need to do is check this little checkbox right here on the external data sources setup page for enabling writes. Now, what I want to mention is that writes require ID mapping. So if you select high data volume, it will disable your ID mapping, and you would not be able to take advantage of writes. So if you want to enable writes, make sure you do not select high data volume. Okay, let's actually take a look at how we can do our writes. So going back to my employees object, I see a button here, new, and when I hit that, I'm presented with a set of fields that I can fill in. So, for example, I can say Ashley, hire date, last name Simpson, phone number, salary, let's say 80,000, and email. Just something random, and I try to save that. Okay, and it worked. So you can see that I actually got an ID. So it means it created a record in the external system, and we can just go back there and quickly verify if it created a record for us. So I can run a SQL command. Select. Okay, so as you can see, this is the record that I just created. And what I can also go ahead and do is edit. Let's say we want to promote this person. So looks like that worked, and we can verify that here. And the salary got bumped up. Now we can also go, you can see the delete button, so we can also go ahead and delete this record. Say this person is leaving. And again, I can verify that here. So no data found, that means the row was deleted. So then this is what my upsert rows looks like. We can send in an upsert context, which has a selected table, and the rows that we want to upsert. And the way to tell apart an insert from a delete is that the insert won't have an external ID. So once the record is actually saved, it's going to come back with an external ID that you can plug in. And what you return back is an upsert result, which has a success flag, error message, external ID. And we have something similar for deletes as well. And that concludes my demo. Over to Ralph to talk about the roadmap for Salesforce Connect.
Thank you, Shefali. I mean, we're a little over time, so I'm wondering if we should move to question and answers.
Okay.
Would it be okay with you, or do you want to spend a few more minutes? We talk quickly about the roadmap. Questions?
They're saying roadmap.
Okay. Quick. I probably mentioned earlier, with Windows 17, the key feature that we released was reporting in dashboard as well as wave trending. In addition, we also made some changes to the layout for external objects. So we added feed-based page layouts. In Spring, what we are currently working on is to GA the Salesforce Connector CRUD capabilities. Today, that's only available in pilot. So it's the idea that you can link Salesforce orgs with each other, and you can actually read and write. So you could, for example, create an opportunity from your org in a different org. I call it the three-legged stool that makes our life really challenging. And if you have worked with multi-currency pick lists or lookups, you might understand why this is so challenging. So we need to provide the ability that you don't have to just enter the ID of a user that is the owner of a record. We really want you to be able to look up the user from the data set of the linked org. So that's why this is quite challenging. Last but not least, the console is really one of the most frequently used use cases for external objects, whether it's Service Cloud or Sales Cloud. So we really wanted to have feature parity with all the other objects. So we will have highlights panels as well as custom components for the console. And then long term, these are really big ticket items. I mean, one is what we call remote change tracking. I mean, as you probably saw in the demo, typically you go to a record or you do a query to get the data from the external system. Now what we want to be able to do is to reverse that. Let's say the salary would have been changed in Oracle. How can I notify Salesforce that that event happened? We also want to do it the other way around. Let's say a workflow or trigger event happens in Salesforce. Today, external objects, we don't save the data, so we don't really have triggers. So we have to find a way to enable that we can also use workflow and triggers to kick off the Apex connector, in this case, or Salesforce Connect. Another big item is advanced data management. So today, especially for OData, I think it's also the case for your custom connector, you go out, you get the object definition, you validate and sync, if there is a change in the external data source, today you have two options. You either manually do the same changes in your Salesforce system, or you basically override the definition that you have. So it kind of recreates a little bit of setup work, so we really want to avoid it. So we want to be able to give you a much more granular way of validating and syncing this data from the external system. Last but not least, when we designed Salesforce Connect, the premise was really it's external data, it's owned by the external system. The external system has its own user and sharing rules, so we don't mess with that. But then our customers taught us differently. What they really would like to see is the ability that you can extend some of the sharing within Salesforce to related objects in the external data source. Again, it's a gnarly big problem for us, but these are kind of the things that we are working on long term. So now we have the option questions. It would be easy if you have a question, just walk up to the microphone. Other than that, all you have to do is give a big round of applause to Shefali, because I think she did an awesome job.